All right. Okay. So on this one for just negotiating the deal, today we're going to talk about really the conversation is around the content. We'll hit some of the topics that are in the content, but it's really just to have a conversation around negotiating at a high level. It's kind of a mastery conversation when I share this stuff and just using real world experiences on what negotiating is and how to do it. And one of the things that as we go through this, there's a lot of meat in here and a lot of conversations around which hat you're wearing, how you're negotiating and doing that kind of stuff. So this is probably a video. You're not going to master negotiating skills on this one session. So this is definitely one that you're going to want to go back and watch the video again. I included in the email for everybody that's registered the links to go back to some of the past sessions. So hopefully you're getting that. And just to know that whether you're writing an offer, whether you're representing the buyer or representing the seller, that in the negotiation skills that I'm going to talk about today in the examples, you're going to find that you're actually moving from one side to the other. So you may be representing a buyer in a situation. However, you might be taking that buyer representation hat off and putting on the seller hat to really think about how the other side is perceiving what's happening in the situation, and or when they're bringing back counter offers to whatever the situation may be, that you're always going to want to put yourself in their situation so you can receive it the way that they're probably receiving it, and how to present it back to your client. And I know I'm kind of talking at a high level here, or not really high level, a general level. But when you're representing your buyer or putting a deal together, for example, you're going to get the information that you need from your client to prepare whatever you're preparing in their best interest. When you take it back over to the buyer side, you're going to see here in a minute, we'll cover all this stuff, but that you're looking at, it's probably going to their agent before it's going to them, and you're going to give them the words that you want them to say, and that when they come back, you actually have to almost absorb that from the other side in whatever the situation is and present that to your client in the best light. Because ultimately what's happening here is we're getting the buyer and the seller to sell their property, and it's not you against them or them against us. And if the buyer wants to buy the house, then we just got to make sure we describe everything and give them all the information to make the right choice for them. And we'll talk more about this as we go through, but you're actually going to be negotiating from both sides for your party that you're representing. Is kind of what I want to get at. So even though you sign a buyer agency, you may be talking to your buyer about if they took, say, for example, a counter offer from the seller on price. You're going to want to explain that price, knowing that that's what the seller brought back, is going to work and still fit in what your client wants to accomplish. So if they countered the price $5,000, for example, and the interest rate is 4%, it's really going to change their payment about $20 a month. So when that counter offer comes back, it's like, can you believe they countered $5,000? That house ain't worth $5,000. That's not going to help you get the deal together. But when you're negotiating, even with your own client, it's to say, now, how you guys know what the house is worth to you. And to have this house, it technically, even though it's a $5,000 counter, they did counter the price. However, it's really about $20 a month. So is $20 a month over what you were thinking the payment was going to be worth getting the house and owning the house and making it yours and raising your family. And it kind of comes back to there when we talked about the big why at the very, very beginning of Ignite. And I said, one of the things that you want to do is master finding out people's why, like why they're moving, why it's important, why is that date important, who are they doing it for, all that stuff. So that clear down the line right here, for $20 a month, you had said in the very beginning that you wanted to get out of the area that you were in. You wanted to get the kids in better schools. You wanted to do all that stuff. So in your mind, yeah, it sucks they countered $5,000, but the reality is for $20 a month, can you get your children into a better school, get into the area you really want? And that's what you're trying to lay out. You're not trying to convince them to do one thing or anything else that's not what they want, but you're coming back to their why and laying the information out. So I think you'll get a little more of this as we go through some of it, but I'll also pause in case I've stirred up any questions or comments or anything that you're thinking right now.
I don't have any questions. I think that's a good point, though.
All right. So yeah, when you're negotiating, you know, the one thing I say in negotiating is, and actually saying this with your clients, this is actually part of even going back again to the beginning when we talked about value proposition. When you're writing down your value propositions, your value proposition, and when you're talking to people, is to show why you're better and why they should work with you over an average agent. So one of the little zingers that you can put in here, I don't know if that's my phone dinging, I hope it's not. We'll find out. I think just switched a button. But one of the zingers that you can give somewhere in that earlier stage of meeting someone is that we know, like, buyers and sellers both want somebody to help them navigate them through the transaction and all the other stuff. So when it comes to negotiating, this is probably one of your more powerful things that once you want to show up as part of your value proposition, is what I'm trying to say. And that is that they do not teach negotiating skills in real estate school. And this is kind of the one thing that even going through this session, that you can say, listen, I am continually working on negotiating tactics, scripts, ways to get your deal, or ways to negotiate better terms and transactions for people. And honestly, I can say that in real estate school, when most real estate agents get their real estate license, they don't even talk about negotiating tactics. There is nothing about negotiating. And you could confirm that if they do talk about it, but I don't think they talk about it in school at all. But we have negotiating classes and sessions to make us master negotiators. That is a value proposition that you won't necessarily get with most realtors. Unfortunately, most real estate agents, when they get out of real estate school, if they didn't pick Keller Williams, they may have picked another brokerage that doesn't even really talk to them about this kind of stuff. This class is not happening that I know of at any other brokerage, let alone like a negotiating class like this. I don't know of any other brokerage that has this kind of training going on. So just keep in mind, the zinger there is not every agent even learns negotiating tactics. A lot of times they just might put an offer together, send it. If they had inspection items, they just put it together, they make their list and send it, see what happens. When in actuality, when we're talking about negotiating tactics, you want to get as much information as you can from the other side. And we'll clarify this a little bit more in the session. I'm just kind of having a conversation around it to set the stage for what we're about to go through. And that is, if you get inspection notice, if you can find out information from the other side of, here's the 7 items that we're about ready to ask for. If I could find out from the other side if any of those 7 items are a concern to them before I've sent it and revealed what it is. Let's say, for example, a big one, either like foundation repair or an HVAC system. An HVAC system is, you know, going to be what, $6,000, $6,000 to put a new one in, right? So if it is shot, if you can make that call ahead of time to the other agent and you're working in a cooperative like mindset and work zone, you can call them and go, hey, we got the inspection items back, we're working through some stuff. And I was just curious, like, really out of the inspection, the HVAC came back in really, really poor condition. So I'm working through the list to figure out what we're going to do here. But what if, you know, what if the seller saw something like a new HVAC system? How would they react to that? And if you can find that information out, how the agent responds, oh, well, they're not planning on putting a new HVAC in, then at least I know some information that when that shows up on my resolution, I'm going to be able to sell this to them. It's actually not even sell it to them. It's going to give the other party the words that you would want to use if you were sitting in front of their client, convincing them why replacing the HVAC is the best thing they could do. And this kind of goes back to a kind of a layer we put in everything in Ignite at a mastery level, by the way. This is why I say watching this video over a couple times will be helpful, because you're not going to be able to master it in this 1 hour today. But it is literally helping them understand that this might be the best situation that they're going to have, so that they make the least amount of counter objections back, and you're basically selling it. So I'm telling the agent what I want them to say to their client and giving them the words on purpose and showing the benefit to the other party of why doing this is going to work. Now, whatever comes back, this is the part I was saying earlier about taking the hat off for the buyer and the seller. If I'm representing the buyer and we're asking for a new HVAC and we send it over and it comes back from the seller that they're not going to do that, then now I really do have to turn around. Even though I'm representing the buyer, I need to explain this in a way that if they really want this house, how they could do that without the HVAC being covered, and how that would be a benefit to them to make this deal work, even though they're not going to get the HVAC. And maybe I'll set it into context in an example, just to kind of lay out as we go through more things. It might make it more realistic for you. So in a real situation, furnace and AC are shot. It's completely rusted at the bottom. It's completely out. Seller didn't know that they were going to be replacing this, but it came back out of the inspection report. Now, representing the buyer, going and asking for these items, one of the things that we were able to do, and it depends on every situation. So again, you got to check with Chris on how to handle this sometimes, but the appraisal came back higher than the purchase price. And we went to the lender and asked and said, hey, we've got this HVAC unit. It's costly. It's like $6,000 for a new one. We've got like $8,000 extra in the appraisal. Is there a way for us to change the price, get this thing put in? Seller's going to net the same either way. The buyer's getting a new AC furnace. In this particular situation, this is something that happened, and they're going to get the new HVAC system in. That their mortgage payment's going to be, about what, 4 times 6, 20, 25 bucks more a month. But we were able to get everybody to say this is good. The lender said, yep, you can do it this way. The appraisal's good as long as it's under the appraisal. The seller was netting the same, and the AC and furnace got put in prior to closing, like right at closing, and they were just paid right out of the proceeds from the sale of the home. We were able to verify that, make sure it was all legit with everybody, and just thinking of different situations, right? But when that came back, so it went across that the seller replaced the HVAC, came back that they really didn't want to get into doing all that, especially at that price. Buyer was willing to just, well, I want the house, so I'm going to move forward either way. I wish we could get it covered so I wasn't out of pocket all that, but I'll just have to save up my money and get it done later, right? And I'll just do it in 6 months or a year. But by playing around with that, we were able to make it win for both parties. So they got it in, didn't have to worry about it later. They weren't going to be out of pocket, and their payment was just a little bit higher. But either way, that still would have come back to the buyer and said, so if the seller's not willing to do the HVAC based on the terms that we currently have, how bad do you want this house? Like, is the HVAC enough to keep you from buying it? And the buyer said no. So it is putting that hat back on. Even though you're representing the buyer, they still may want to buy the house without it. So don't make those decisions for them, right? So now we'll kind of take this through, and we might come back to some of that scenario as we're going through a couple of these things. And again, if I spark anything at all out of you, just kind of raise your hand, flag, unmute yourself, whatever. And we'll talk about that. But the things that we're going to talk about today, this is like an example of what I was just explaining on the path of how the negotiation goes. And so from this instance, we're going to say you're the buyer's agent, right? So anytime something happens from the buyer, it's going to come to you. Then it's got to go from you to the seller agent. Then it's got to go from the seller to the, or seller's agent to the seller. Then it's got to come back to the seller's agent. Then it's got to come back to you, and then get back to the buyer. So first of all, it's understanding that there can be a delay in this, that there's a channel that everything has to go through. and it can affect your ability to negotiate the outcome of the deal, because it's going from your buyer to you to the agent. You don't know how it's being presented to the seller from the other agent. Always keep that in mind, that you that's why I say, like, give them the words that you want them to use. If they choose not to use them, then they choose not to use them. I'm going to say most of the time, if you're saying something and it sounds like a benefit to their client, that they're going to use your words to get the deal together too. Because ultimately, under the core of everything, and I'm not saying this is everybody in our office necessarily, because I know we do really well, most agents really do work for their clients' best interests. But for the most part in real estate, the agents need a commission check. And when they're getting this close to a deal that they've got a contract accepted, and let's just say, for example, you're negotiating repairs, I mean, they are counting on that commission check. Most agents spend their commission check before they get it. They spend it the minute the offer gets accepted. They're like, oh, I'm going to make this amount of money and I've got to pay this off and that off. So they've already spent it. So a lot of times they're just trying to get a commission check. So by you giving them the words that will benefit their client, it will keep maybe a less experienced agent, get them trapped in a situation where the client reacts and you don't get the deal put together. This would, for this example, I'm going to use, like, say, closing costs, for example, and really walk through a closing cost negotiating example where a buyer is asking for $5,000 in closing costs, right? So that comes to the buyer's agent, and we just kind of naturally fill that in. Okay, what's your price? And writing in the closing costs and all that stuff. But when you if you just sent that over to the seller's agent and they send it to their buyer, especially if it's an elderly client, like somebody from an era where they had to make all their own money and they always had their money, they never asked for anybody to pay for stuff, and you just sent the offer over and they're looking at it going, they want us to do what? They want us to pay $5,000 in their closing costs? Are you kidding me? They can't pay their own closing costs? Now, we know that there's more than just $5,000 in closing costs. The buyer's still going to show up in an FHA loan or a conventional loan with their down payment, but it's going to be somewhere around six, seven, $8,000 that they still have to come up with, unless it's like a VA loan, right? But what happens is, if you just send it over and the seller reacts like, I'm not paying their closing costs. Well, in reality, if the offer on the house is, say, 250,000 with $5,000 in closing costs, the seller's really not paying for the buyer's closing costs. Okay. The same situation, the same way to describe that same deal is, the buyer's really offering $245,000 for the house. They have $5,000 in closing costs worked in the deal to make the offer 250. So the seller is going to net on 245. So really, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, they're offering you 245. And that's the way you need to present things as it goes through the chain. So if you've got something even as simple as closing costs, do not take it for granted, because you don't know how it's being presented on the other side. And you want to give them the words to show them the benefit to the other side for taking this offer the way it is given to them, because we want the $5,000 closing cost in the price of the house for our buyer, because it's $5,000 less they got to show up with. So that same situation, when you're talking about your ability to negotiate, if I want to tell the agent, now listen, you're going to see closing costs in there, but really that's worked into the price of the house. So your net's still going to be, for your clients, going to be on the 245. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'm just saying that's really what it is. I know you're going to see closing costs in here. If your seller doesn't understand closing costs or paying a buyer's closing costs, hopefully you can explain to them that they're really not paying the buyer's closing costs. It's all factored into the price of the house and the loan and all that stuff. So in this particular case, that would really help the buyer out for them to buy this property on these terms, if they don't have to come to closing with that extra 5,000, and your seller's still going to net what they're going to net. So it's just giving them the words. When you think about it, there's a lot of stuff this says on here, where there's some ways that you negotiate in your everyday life. I mean, if you want to go to a different restaurant than your spouse, you're probably going through and saying something about the benefit of going here is they do have a salad, or they do have this if that's what they wanted, and they're going to benefit, like it's closer. We can get there and back without going farther out of our way to go to another place. You're always going to find something that there's a benefit in going along with your plan to them versus going along with their plan. Not that you're not going to go to their restaurant or whatever. I don't know. That might be a bad example to use for everyday examples. We kind of do this stuff with our kids and stuff too. It's just, you got to explain the benefit. Well, and actually most parents don't do this. What is the benefit of a child keeping their room clean, right? Or making their bed every morning? We don't even talk about what their benefit is. The benefit might be that, hey, allowance is tied to that. And what you've been able to do with your allowance is buy that game station, right? You saved up your money for 6 months last summer and you bought that new game station. And that's because you got allowance every week. Every week that you don't clean your room, you don't get allowance, and you're not going to be in a position to buy that next game system when it comes out. So you always want to show the benefits. The skills that a great negotiator possesses is by keeping the deal together. You have a buyer and you have a seller, and they want to buy and they want to sell. And a good negotiator will remove them out of the situation, and they will diffuse the emotions that may get in to make people make snap decisions or argue back and forth. You never want to get into the battle zone, because once it turns in against them, against you, it's going to be hard to negotiate to win for both parties. So if you ever get an agent that is getting out of control in a situation, what closing costs? You know, I mean, we're getting showings left and right. Why would the seller pay closing costs? It's, you got to diffuse that and calm it down and get it back to the benefit of the seller. And I'm just using examples, but if you get an agent that's kind of starting to go crazy, it's like, hold on, wait, I understand. I hear what you're saying. Remember, I have a buyer that wants to buy your seller's house, and they want to get your seller the net that you're hopefully wanting to get for your seller, so we can put this deal together. And in this particular case, like, if you don't have another offer in your hand, you have one right now. Don't be mad at this person because they made the terms the way they are. They've at least written you an offer, and it sounds like you've had other showings that they haven't written an offer yet. So what do we need to do to make this work to be win-win for the buyer and the seller? And sometimes it could be, I'll give you a specific example, in a multiple offer situation where they were taking offers until Sunday and had a buyer that wanted to write an offer on this house and did not want to get into the multiple offer situation. They wrote the offer on a Friday and had it expire on Friday, even though the agent had said we're taking all offers till Sunday. But when the offer is presented to the agent and you put it in terms of explaining the benefit to their client of looking at this offer that's expiring on Friday, knowing that they were taking them on Sunday, this particular situation was, here's an offer, and just addressing it up front. This offer does expire tonight. I know that you said Sunday was the cutoff date. However, this buyer has, in this particular case, has missed out on a couple other properties. And when one shows up tomorrow that's right, they're going to make an offer on that one. So it does have a Friday expiration date. If you could just print the net sheet off for the offer, and if you could just share that with your seller so they know what the offer is, they know what they're going to net, and then just let me know, if you're not going to take it and they might buy something tomorrow, or if they're around Sunday, maybe we'll come back. But just show them the net sheet and see what they say. So this offer was like $12,000 over asking price. They get the net sheet, and the seller looked at it and got the call back from the agent saying they're going to go ahead and take the offer. And it was because we explained the benefit of just looking at the net sheet to see if that's a number that works, and then giving them the words that we wanted them to say. And that was, if they really want to take a chance to see what might come on Sunday, not knowing for sure what they're going to get, knowing what they've got in their hand right now that expires tonight at Friday. I mean, if they want to take that chance and wait and do all that stuff, then that's their decision, but just show them the net sheet and let them decide. Well, they looked at it and it was more than what they thought they were going to get, so they took it. not even knowing that they might have gotten 20 or 30,000 over asking. Who knows? That day never showed up. But it was showing the benefit and giving the agent the words to present the offer ahead of time and what the benefit of that would be. The house would be sold, it would be on your terms. They can start packing and getting ready to move and getting their new home. All those things can happen in that conversation of showing a benefit of presenting the offer early. Now, guys, that's a real world situation right now in a multiple offer market where agents are saying final and best by this date. Nobody likes final and best. It just sounds mean and nasty and like they're just getting crazy prices. So whenever a master negotiator is going in, they're looking at the benefits for the client and give the words in this particular case, because we go from our side to the other side through an agent to get to their client, giving them the words that you would say if you could present it yourself. Obviously, it'd be awesome if we could just meet the other party on all of our real estate transactions and present for our clients. That way you wouldn't have to worry about how the other agent is presenting things. But that's where love letters came from, offer letters, things like that, was to give the other party the verbiage to really sell the offer and help them get it. But so the other part of that is when anything goes through the chain and then it's coming back, you might have to take that hat off and put on the seller hat when you're representing the buyer and explain why the seller countered what they did and what the benefit is to the buyer. So it is asking a lot of questions to the seller's agent or the opposite agent, and getting all the information that you can so that you can sell the benefit to that other side. So trying to think of something else that might be a good way to explain. Oh, just when you're putting together an offer, before you ever, I mean, if your people are interested and or even before you show the property, if you can get as much information about that property and about that agent and about their client before you write an offer on it, would be to send an email before every single showing and or pick up the phone and call. Do both, right? Call the listing agent and say, hey, how has traffic been on that listing? So one, I'm finding out before we show it, they've had 30 showings in the last 24 hours. Okay. And then asking also, do you have any offers in hand yet? And you'll hear stuff like either, well, we've had tons of interest but nothing in hand. So now I know there's 30 showings, tons of interest, nothing in hand. We're not necessarily competing right now, but we most likely could be competing from the time we drop the offer off until it gets presented, right? Or if they say it's been great traffic, but no offers in hand, nobody's really shown that they're writing anything, or maybe they just had 5 or 6 showings and no offers in hand. So that's going to tell you that you might not have to go $40,000 over to get this house. If it's been on the market for 2 weeks, they're not getting much traffic and they haven't had any offers in hand. Now I might be able to actually, in a competitive market, knowing that the house is overpriced, offer a reasonable price just under asking and still get the house. Now there's still a whole nother thing in there that if I come in under asking price just to get even though it may be overpriced, once that offer is delivered, it's buying the other agent time to go find another offer or get somebody off the fence. So it doesn't mean you won't be in competitive situations, but it may change how you're presenting. Now, how would I in this market present an offer under asking price on an overpriced listing that they just think they're going to get multiple offers, right? How would I sell that as a benefit to them? Well, the sell of the benefit is to say to the agent, hey, I provided 3 comps to the house and we really struggled with the number. We were pushing every dollar out of this to get the offer as close to asking price as possible. And I just have not been able to find the comps that would even back it, not even the pendings, right? Because it's an overpriced listing. So I'm really working for that. In fact, if you have anything that I can present back to my buyer to show them where you guys came up with the price, that would help me. And I would have probably asked for that before I wrote the offer, knowing that we were going to write the offer for a little less. And most of the time, believe it or not, the agent will probably say, I don't really have any comps. And that, knowing that information just told you how you're going to really be able to sell your offer for not being asking price if you can do that without competing bids. And I'm sharing these different scenarios with you because this market's not always going to be like it is. And that scenario I just gave you is happening in this multiple offer situation world that we're in right now. Every day it's happening, where you can come in under asking price, $5,000, and still get closing costs, maybe, who knows? But it's feeling out that information that they didn't have any offers. Traffic's been a little slow. So, the seller's got to be a little frustrated that they didn't get people fighting over their house. So now I'm going to sell and give to the agent the words that are going to make that offer the best offer they're going to get. And that could be just addressing right up front, hey, I'm sending over a great offer. It's not asking price. However, we pulled up comps, we really dug around. I mean, I pushed this number up as high as the buyer is willing to go. And we're probably still above what the comps were that we found. So if you have anything to support that, that would help. But anyway, they've really put a lot of thought into this and didn't just throw this number out of the air. So now when the agent goes down to the seller, see, they're already ready to be chewed out for bringing them an offer less than asking price when their seller thought they were going to have multiple offers. And you already gave them the words like, hey, listen, this is a really good offer. Even though it's not quite asking price, just hear me out and we'll go through this and we'll look at the net sheet at the end. I would give them personally, I would give them all that information to say that, and then just review the net sheet with them, show them what they're going to net at the end of the day, and blah, blah, blah. So that's how you get them and give them the information to present. Okay, let me stop there for a minute because I just gone through like a whole bunch of different scenarios. Are you able to relate that to anything that you've maybe dealt with or gone through in the past, and or a situation where you're like, I might do that differently next time? Are you picking up some good stuff?
Yeah, definitely. And actually, I had a situation where you were saying about like the Friday expiring offer, where we kind of did that, but it wasn't intentional. Because the house went on the market, they didn't have they didn't say they were gonna, review offers on Sunday.
Yep.
We had the first offer in, and it expired, 24 hours later. And then they said, oh, actually, we're gonna wait and then check offers on Sunday. So my client said, well, this is my offer. Once it expired, we would put an offer on a new house and got it.
Yep.
They ended up getting a second offer, but it was less than ours. And so then they kept asking us to put a new offer in, but
yep.
So they ended up losing out just because they decided, and we had put in a full price offer, no closing costs. It was a pretty good offer. So.
And now you get to use that story with the next agent that says they're reviewing offers on Sunday. You can put the expiration on Friday and actually call them and go, hey, I know you said Sunday, this is Friday, but I just had a situation previous like this and just go through the story. So then hopefully that one thing that you might have taken away is just go ahead and run the net sheet on the offer the way it is and show it to your seller. And if they really want to take a chance like that other couple did and maybe get less offer like that other couple did, I mean, that's their prerogative. There's nothing I can do there, but at least give them the opportunity to see the net and decide if they want to take that chance or not, or just go ahead and consider the house sold and start moving. So see how I even just said right there, just consider the offer good. If they like the net sheet and it's good and they sign this offer, they can actually be at peace knowing that they can now move on with their new deal. The agent's going to use that exact same conversation with their client when they get it. So yeah, that's awesome. And it would have been better if they could have just gotten them to take it and your people would have won that house, but you probably sold them another one anyway, right?
Yeah, I did. We ended up getting a different house that ended up being more money too. So
right. So yeah, hopefully that's something you can use to actually show the benefit of really truly looking at it and considering it. And again, if they just decide after they've been given a little bit extra information and a benefit of taking it and they decide not to, then it really is their fault for getting less, And so that is one of the other things there is providing comps with your offer, just to show this is, we have crunched the numbers and these were the somewhat similar properties that were used to verify that number. And if you look at it, the number's actually better than all of these, right? So the client's even willing to go more for this. Because then you can have that conversation of, if you know that's a good price and it's towards the top, you probably also, once you get to know the markets well, you'll be able to know like if the offers are going to come in a little bit lower because they're just pushing it too far. You're not always going to know that. And in a crazy market where things are just going for 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 over with no rhyme or reason, you're not going to be able to predict those. But in most markets, you'll know that this is a pretty good offer. This is a strong offer. If they get any others a day or two from now, they're probably not going to be as strong. You can really use that verbiage to get them to make that decision.
And then as far as the house being overpriced, I mean, I like that too, because we had that happen also recently where I looked at the comps, because I always obviously pull the comps first and tell my client what they came back at. But the house had only been on the market for a day. They ended up putting in a full price offer, even though I told them it was overpriced. And then the appraisal came low. So they did get it at a lower price. But I don't like letting people pay too much for a house.
Well, and again,
I mean, it's not my choice, obviously. So
yeah, right. Well, and the thing is we're representing them and looking at that, but as long as you explain that to them. So in this particular market, when I say like, even though we're representing the buyer, they want to buy a house, and knowing their why, like, let's just say it would be to get out of a certain part of town that's not great with really like lower school standards and all that stuff. And they really want to be in more of a family oriented area and get their kid in a good school. Then every day that they're in that house, they could be missing out on getting what they're looking for. So once I understand their why, that particular situation could come back and say, it really is hard to say what overpriced is. And I would just be honest and say, I know what my opinion is on things. However, I see things selling and appraising for more. So you guys ultimately will decide on the real true value and how important it is to be in that area. I'm just going to make sure I gave you all the information you need to make the best choice for you. So one of the common things in this crazy market, and it is like, I personally was in a situation where we'd offer 10 over and the house that won was 20 over. The next house we went 20 over to beat them out, since that's what was happening, and it went for 30 over. And then it got to 40 over and we were 30 over, and it was a VA guy, right? So, and it just finally got to the point to where 40,000 over, I didn't even have to say that was grossly out of line and overpriced. He knew it was. But the one that he ended up getting was, I think, like 12,000 over asking, because it only had one other offer against us on that particular one, but it was like 2 months later. So the market had finally cooled down, like 40,000 was just out of control and it was leveling back down. So when that happened, by the time that happened, I've used this story before. In that particular case, the listing agent knew us. We have a co-op relationship. Like every agent in the market that you can talk to and be friends with, drop them a note, just say it's great working with you, or super glad we met at the SAR award, the SAR awards, and all that other stuff, and get those relationships good. This particular one, the listing agent called and said, hey, I've got a conventional loan. Your buyer's at VA. The offers are really close, but if there's any way your guy could go conventional, I would rather work with you. That was the exact words, right? And it was just because of reputation. I'd rather work with you than the other agent. So checking on his credit and all that other stuff, the lender was like, yeah, he can go conventional. He just wanted to use his VA. So we went ahead and got the conventional approval letter, submitted in, got our offer accepted. They gave us a little counter offer, and he took that. But really everything else was going $20,000, $30,000 over, and now we're only like $10,000 or $12,000 over asking. And it was a decent house. He liked it, right? So once we got it accepted with that conventional approval letter, I just called the agent back and I said, hey, do you mind if we do a VA appraisal just to see if anything comes back? Sure enough, the VA appraiser came out, it appraised, no requirements. So we were able to switch it back to VA, but we did what we needed to do to get it accepted. And that was basically talking to the agent. So I'm glad he called and did that. but I also sold the benefit of it's really not going to affect your seller's net by us switching back to VA. Where if I would have just submitted it, ordered it, and just said, hey, we want to switch back to VA, he'd be like, the buyer was like, the seller was like, no, we went conventional. But in actuality, it wouldn't have affected the seller at all. So just selling back to the agent, the benefit of us going at VA is if an appraisal requirement comes up, we'll stick with the conventional. But if we can use his VA, he'd like to, and it won't change your seller's net at all. Once the appraisal's done, that was the only thing that was different. And other than that, it closed perfectly VA. So anyway, I don't know if that's a good example or not, but just showing the benefit of making those changes or accepting whatever will help you out, understanding the other side of the party and asking a lot of questions. There are some, in this particular session, there's like a couple of case studies. And again, because we're doing an hour, we're bringing the real world conversation in here. The case studies are for you to kind of work on outside of our session today. Come up with what you would do. And if you want to send those to me, I would be more than happy to review them or go through the case studies with you. But we got a couple case studies that'll come up, and we're already kind of using a bunch of real world examples anyway. But so like I said, that's available for you. Okay, so common points in negotiations. There's basically two categories. It's price and terms. Price is price, but terms could be a whole bunch of stuff that could roll in there. And so when you're looking at terms like everything from closing costs, closing date, conveyances, meaning what they're leaving with the property or taking, earnest money and option fees. We don't really see option fees a whole lot of time, but earnest money. I mean, negotiating what earnest money, your amount could be very important, a very important factor of how the offer is received. So if you got a first time home buyer that you know doesn't have a whole lot of money and they are really scraping everything they've got to get into a property, that might require a call to the agent ahead of time to say, you know, again, how's your traffic been on your property? Have you had any offers? I mean, it's just normal and no offers in hand. Okay, so I've got a first time home buyer that's really crunching dollars. Is earnest money a big deal? And if the agent says no, I mean, as long as we get a good offer and the seller nets what they want, no, that's not a big deal. So I might be able to get away with a $200 earnest money. But if that is a big deal to them, I need to know that going in too. It's just any information that I can have. Like if they literally said, now this seller has been burned on people canceling their contract before, he wants $2,000 earnest money. So now if I'm representing the buyer, if I know that information up front, I'm kind of using some extreme examples just to make the point, but if I knew that that earnest money was a big deal to that seller, now I need to go back to my buyer and say, hey, if we really want the best shot at getting this offer accepted, I know the earnest money is a big deal to the other side. Earnest money is going to be sitting in a title company just waiting for you at closing. So for us to make the earnest money as high as possible to really be attractive for this seller, do you have somewhere else you can get money from if you had to put a bigger earnest money check down? And so now I'm working on them to see what they can get to come up. But I know that in this particular case, earnest money is not going to be a big deal. It's just going, it's their pre-down payment. And even if they were a VA or something like that, they're going to get zero down so they get that money back at closing. But I also know that if I put a low earnest money amount in there, it's not going to make our offer very attractive. So if I can change that one thing and get them to buy into higher earnest money, then I know the rest of the other terms we might be able to slip some of the other terms through that are not important. So let me summarize that in a really good script to use with agents that send you offers on your listing. So you're the listing agent, and offers coming in. Whenever that offer gets received, before I've talked to the seller, before I've done anything, pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, I just wanted to confirm that I received the offer, because they want to know that you have the offer, right? So go ahead and call them and confirm. And then you say something like this. This is finding out information from the other side for you to negotiate the best terms for your client. And you say to every single person that sends an offer, It's like, hey, I got your offer. So I noticed the price was this, and you had this for earnest money, and you got whatever it is, closing costs, you got the closing date, you got all this stuff in there. I just kind of highlight the terms of the offer. And then you say to them, you say, now I'm going to do my best to sell this to my seller and get them to take it. I mean, that's ultimately what we're trying to do, right? It doesn't matter what the terms are. They could be low balling. They could be asking for $20,000 in closing costs. I say, I'm going to do my best to present this in the best light to sell it to my seller. And if you know it's a bad offer, you could even say, if there's anything else you want to send me to support your offer and what the terms are, I would be more than happy to present those with the offer, meaning get me some more stuff, send me some comps, send me a reason why you're offering what you're offering so that I can present that to my seller to present it as this might be the best offer they're going to get. But when they get it, they're going to look at the terms and go, well, we're not doing that. That's way off from where we started. And then I've got to go back and then sell the other party on why that's the best counter offer they're going to get. But when that comes in and I say, so you got this, here's your price, here's your earnest money, closing cost, date, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to present this the best way that I can. Now, if the sellers decide they're going to change something in here, what's the most important thing on this offer that you want me to try and not get changed? And it's just really feeling them out for other information. See, a good negotiator is going to find out as much as they can about the other side so that they can formulate their plan to give them the feeling they're getting what they're wanting. And in most cases, the response to that is, well, the closing cost is pretty important. I mean, they are scraping up their money to get the rest of the down payment, all that stuff, or they've saved some, but that's just 5,000 less they'd have to show up with. And they got stuff they want to do to fix the house and all that other stuff, right? So it almost always is the closing cost. So now when I come over to the seller and I present this offer and I say, all right, so we got a great offer on the house. Let me go through the terms. In fact, I usually even say, don't even react to the terms until we get to the net and get through all the terms, and then we'll talk about it. Because the first thing you do is you go through, they're offering you this, and then they either like it or they don't. But you get down to closing costs. And they got $5,000 in closing. What? We're not paying their closing costs. They should have their own money, blah, 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 blah. So they're already not paying attention to the rest of the offer. And what's more important is the net at the end of the day. So again, it's now that I know the closing cost is important to the buyer, when we go to the net and we look and the net sheet is $5,000 less than what the seller is willing to take, they're not willing to take a dollar less than that. And we know that the $5,000 closing cost is important to the buyer. That was the most important thing that they said. So now I know we're going to counter the price $5,000 and leave the closing cost in there. And to the seller, that's the same as not paying it. I mean, we're just putting it into the price of the house. We're countering the price of the house, $5,000. You're going to net the same either way. So it's not about them paying the closing costs. It's about presenting it in a way so that they will make the best decision and get their house sold. All right, let me pause there in case you have anything you want to ask or add on that particular scenario.
No, I don't.
All right. Okay, so using negotiating tips to respond to common points. We're going to talk about the 3 Ps here, and that's kind of what we've already done on the different types of Ps. Like for example, on the 3 Ps, the first one is prepare. And preparing is learning everything that you need to know about the other side as much as possible so that you can use all that in your negotiations to sell the benefits to whichever side you're actually working on that time. Even though you might be representing the buyer, you're still selling the seller on the benefits of your offer. Once they counter, you're selling your buyer client on the benefits of accepting the seller's counter offer so that they can buy the property and get out of that neighborhood and get your kids in a better school. And again, if they decide that those terms aren't good, then they can just not buy the house as well. But they wrote the offer because they wanted to. And I took a bunch of notes on this kind of stuff. So I'm just making sure, knowing your goal, both the buyer and the seller want to buy and sell. And if they just snap, if the seller just reacts like, I'm not paying their closing costs, well, then you're not selling your house. So it's like I said, I think when we were talking about sellers couple sessions ago, if a seller can do three things: either accept the offer, counter the offer, or reject the offer. And I can't imagine any situation where rejecting the offer is the choice ever, because there's no chance to sell your property with a rejected offer. Even if you counter some ridiculous, out of the world, crazy, ridiculous offer because they made you mad, then at least you have a shot at getting it sold. But when you reject, it's over. You can't sell your house. So knowing the goal, they both want to sell the house. So your objective is to give them the words that will get the house sold. So if you just don't want to pay their closing costs and raise the price up, then I mean, is it okay if your house doesn't sell? You might have just bought your house back for $5,000, right? Another one on sellers is this is the net. A good way to say it is, if I handed you a check for that amount right now and you were done, that's the amount that you get to put in your bank account and go do the things that you were going to do. Remember, you were going to pay off that student loan, you were going to pay off the car, and then put the money down on your house. So if the check were that amount and you could do that, isn't this an offer you would take? Is this an offer you would take? And if they say, yeah, it would, but I don't want to pay their closing costs, it's like, well, that's the check that you're going to have, and it's going to accomplish everything that you want. Does it matter whether you're paying closing costs or not? And it probably doesn't. Again, I'm using some somewhat extreme examples, but I'm just trying to help you see that showing the benefit of them getting the check that they actually wanted gets them off of whatever the price is, whatever closing costs are, if there's something they're hung up on or whatever. Let's see here. You're a problem solver, basically. So what you're doing is giving solutions, and like I'm saying, give them those solutions in terms of the benefit to them, right? See here on the next one, open-ended questions. I had a couple notes on here. Understanding the right questions to ask when you're negotiating, and that is stuff like what's important to your client, so that you can figure out, you could even do that before you write the offer. I mean, if you want all the information in a competitive bid situation market, you're calling the listing agent saying, hey, what's the seller really want to accomplish out of this? Now, they're not going to tell you what price they'll necessarily their net is or what price they'll finally take. But it's like, if I were to put an offer together, asking the right questions, like, is there a closing date that they're shooting for? Is there, something specific that they're wanting to accomplish out of the sale by a certain time, date, whatever it might be? I'm going to find out as much information as I can from the other side. Let's see, asking open-ended questions versus yes/no questions. Open, a good way to say that is wopen. If it's a wopen-ended question, then it's questions with the W, like what, where, why, that kind of stuff. The only other one in there that's wopen is a how. So those are great ways to ask questions so that you don't get yes/no questions. So like, what's important to the seller is better than, hey, will the seller pay closing costs? The answer to that is yes or no. And it could be, well, no, who wants to pay closing costs? They're not going to automatically say yes. So it's asking about, what's important to the seller in this. Is it the price? Is it the terms? Is there a specific date they're looking for? We want to make our offer as attractive as possible. And the agent wants to sell and make a commission check. So they're going to tell you, there's a lot of information the other agents will tell you if you ask the right questions and if you just ask the question. So a lot of times we're thinking on our side, it's like, what's the bottom dollar they'll take? I mean, that's a great question to ask every single listing agent, just to see what they say. Sometimes they'll say, well, they may have started a little high, but they don't want to go below. Somebody will tell you that. And if you're representing the buyer and that other agent told you that, you can relay that information to them. If you tried to catch me on that one, I would say, well, I would just make your best offer and your best terms, and we'll go from there. Because then I leave you nothing. right? But I want to see what your terms are and what your buyer's interested in if I'm representing a seller. So then I can use that in our situation to better my client's situation by giving you back something that's important to you. So that the negotiating game, if you got great negotiators against each other, they might not tell each other anything. Then you're just going to start and go from there and see what comes out of it. But yeah, so open ended questions, W's with the one how in there will actually help you find out a lot more information. Also, when you're learning is, you know, so if I'm representing a seller in this, what would happen if? So a seller says, I'm not paying their closing costs. So what would happen if they can't buy the house without that extra 5,000 and you don't sell your house right now? You know, because right now the net is what you were wanting to net, or it's close to what you were going to net. Rather than just reject this offer because they wanted you to pay closing costs, why don't we change the price? We'll go back with a little bit higher price and leave the closing cost in, see if we can put this together. Because what if means it doesn't sell if you just reject the offer, right? Or you've already heard me say is, why is that important to you? That's one of the best questions ever when talking to a client and about anything, just when they're pricing their house, the closing date, all that stuff. All right, this is where we run into a couple of these scenarios. And like if you printed out the manual, this is on page 9 of the manual. They just have you in here circle or underline the key areas in which you need more information or certainty before you would make a decision. Now we've got an hour, we've got a couple minutes left in our time, but go through this scenario, print off the manual, go through the scenario, circle the things where you think you need more information, and go through the questions. Actually work through this, because this is what I want you to bring back to me outside of class time. This could be anytime. You could be watching the recording, whenever. Go through the manual, complete these next 3 pages. It's page 9, page 12, and I think 15. Set aside some time, set these pages on your desk and go through them, because it helps you take the information that we're doing right now and what we've talked about so far and see how you can apply it to these case studies, and then get it to me or discuss with somebody else in Ignite, whatever it might be, on what your results were or what questions you came out of that. So that one I'm going to leave you for homework, so that you can apply this stuff, whether you're watching the video again or whatever, and then do share it with me. So here's another one on present. So again, when we're talking and we're asking questions, you're listening to a lot more questions and how they're responding to things. If they're elevating their voice or their heart rate, getting a little mad about something, it's like, hold on, just let's we got a buyer and we got a seller. If you're talking to a co-op agent and they're getting a little elevated and out of control, we got a buyer and we got a seller. They want to buy your client's house and your seller wants to sell it. Let's just work through this and come up with a solution that might work. So pay attention to verbal and nonverbal cues. The other one is silence is key. Whenever you ask a question, especially kind of like well, what's important about that? Just shut up and let them answer it, right? Listen carefully to what's important to the other party. Already talked about that. Stay calm and relaxed. Always, always be that rock to the situation. It will pay off for your client. And things can sometimes get pretty heated. And even if you have to step away from a situation and calm down so you don't get caught up in it, I've never seen a negotiating deal go good when both parties are at each other. Somebody's going to lose, somebody's going to just cancel, and it may seem easier to just say, forget that one, we'll just find another one. Well, now you got another 5-10 hours of time invested in that to find the next property as well. And the worst part is you might have a buyer in that situation that really liked the house, and now everything else is being compared to the one they don't have. So you got to remove all the emotion and get people to talk logic and benefits. Like, what is the benefit of making this work? Well, the benefit of making it work is you get to pack up and move to your new house and start your new life, and they get to move in and get their new life started. So, I mean, that's going to be a plus for both of them. Focus on the customer's needs, even though you are really paying attention to their needs from both sides, that even if you get a counter offer from the seller, You want to sell back to your client what the benefit is of making this one work. And give your offer the best chance by supporting it with all the material. Like whatever your terms are in your offer to a seller, supporting that with comps and other things that the agent can use to show why your offer is where it is, right? Okay, so in the learn thing, buyer want to close in 60 days. The seller wants to close in 30 days. So if you're requesting a 30-day closing, what's important about that 30 days? You're just going to have to ask that question. And sometimes we're going through the agent to the seller to come back. What is it about the 30 days that's critically important? Because if there's a way we can make it work and it's going to be a benefit to the client to do that, then we'll look at it, right? Or if they can't, so in a particular case where a buyer was in a lease until February 15th, didn't want to close for 60 days, because then they would have had if they would have closed in 30 days, they would have an extra house payment and a rent payment for 1 month. And they're a first-time home buyer. They don't have the money. So instead of that being the reason, what's the benefit of the seller waiting 60 days? Well, the benefit could be if it's an example of something that's been on the market for a little while, or it's way overpriced and you know it is, it's like the benefit of not lowering the price and seeing if you get another offer in the next 2 weeks or so. So let's say property's been on for 2 weeks. So taking another 2 weeks or so, and if you had to drop the price to get another buyer, and that's going to take you another 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you're almost at a 60-day closing anyway. And right now you have an offer with terms that would make your seller's net work. So if you don't have any other offers in hand and you got one in hand right now and it's closing in 60 days, it might be better than waiting for a lower offer, which Allison can now use that example on all kinds of positions. You might get a lesser offer and still be 60 days out anyway. So it's just really understanding that stuff and explaining that. Okay, so 12 was another one of the case studies. And in that one, you're choosing, let me see here, that's this one. The property had a 4-bedroom, 3.5 bath listed at $350 in a well-established neighborhood. The house requires new carpeting throughout and a new garage door opener. 3 offers have been made, but we're below asking price. So it's going to give you some examples. It'll focus in here in a minute. From the buyer's agent's role and the listing agent's role, you can go through those and write down what you think about those scenarios and how you would handle them. So you can kind of see where I've gone through that process and written down some stuff. So go through this on page 12 and process through and send it to me. We can review it, or send it through if you've gotten a buddy in the class, going back through it with your buddy and seeing what they say. All right, well, just to wrap up over just a couple minutes over, analyzing counter tactics. So on that one, you're on page 13. They give the different types of tactics: nibbling, hot potato, and good guy, bad guy. So they're going to give you some scenarios, and nibbling is just where you're looking for information. You're going to go through here in your counter tactic and just kind of look at these and go process through these. The thing about nibbling, hot potato, and good guy, bad guy, listen, here's the thing. The reason why I like doing this class in real world conversations is because sitting here, like, what's not going to happen is you're going to be in a negotiating situation. You're like, all right, am I supposed to use hot potato here or good guy, bad guy? The purpose is to work through the exercise so you can kind of see why they called it nibbling, why they called it hot potato, but it's understanding the negotiating tactic that you're using. We have probably covered all of these and all the examples that we use today, but you're not going to when you're really in a negotiating situation, you're not going to go, oh, I think I better use the hot potato one. Actually, good guy, bad guy is good cop, bad cop. You've seen those situations before where, I mean, a lot of people hear that term, so you can get an idea of how this stuff works. But the idea is to go through and practice some negotiating skills, like really outside of this hour, we just talked about the conversation. Now you're putting it into real use. So that's pretty much it. Recapping the day, just any ahas that you've gotten. Was this a good session? Did you pick up anything from it? Something you might be able to use next time?
So one thing I like is, I mean, just hearing how you're saying that you ask all these questions to the listing agent when you are the buyer's agent, because I do that. Like I'll call them and try to figure out what the seller's looking for. But I feel like a lot of times when I call, they kind of act like I'm crazy for even asking any questions. So I'd be interested to hear anyone else from Manhattan, kind of what they say, because especially our market's a lot different than other markets. And it's kind of, at least in my opinion, it's kind of neighborhood based as far as where you can offer low, where you can ask for closing costs and that kind of stuff. And so one thing I do too is I look, every day when all the houses that close, I look at, was it offer, was it asking price, were there closing costs involved? So that's kind of how I keep it up to date with how everything goes here. And so it's just interesting because sometimes I'll call an agent and they're like, why would I tell you that? Why are you even asking? Just send me a full price offer and we'll go from there.
Yeah. Well, and it depends on who you're working with, because 80% of the time, the agents don't sell enough that they probably will tell you more, but you might be talking to some more experienced agents. In fact, if you even with the research that you have on that particular one, if you can think of the next time somebody actually said, well, why would you ask me that? Just make your best offer. Go in immediately and look and see if they do a lot of business. And if they have a lot of transactions, you're dealing with an experienced negotiator.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's one thing too, because I've heard some people say just send me your best offer, and then some people will kind of get into it, but a lot of people here anyway will just say, I can't tell you anything, send me your best offer.
Yeah, actually, I don't know that it's a lot of people will, but you've experienced it more so.
Mhm.
So yeah. And the other thing is that the market is so tight that a lot of agents that are selling, 4 houses a year, these are the people that when you're mastering these calls and that conversation, if you're selling one of their properties, they need a commission check so bad. So knowing that somebody may say that, and actually a newer agent could just snap to, we're doing final and best, just send it over. Say, no, I get it. I want to make sure I do the final and best, and I want to actually make the best offer for your seller's terms. So again, showing the benefits, and I'm giving them the words that I want them to tell me back or to say to their client in a lot of cases. But it's like, I want to make sure that the terms are the best for your seller. So is there any particular one thing in the situation that they're really hoping to hit? Like, is it the closing date, or is it really the price they're really focused on, or what? And so again, because I diffused the agent from just cutting me off and I've asked that other question, what is it about the closing date? What is it about the offer or the sell that would make it really attractive to them? See, they can't answer that yes or no. They're going to have to answer it some way. Right. So there's no, and if they just respond with that snap decision, well, it's just best offer. So they don't have a particular term or anything that they're interested in the offer. Is that what I'm hearing? And if they say yes, I mean, you can have a butthead agent that's going to just do that, but most of the time you won't have that. So again, it's most of the time they will tell you things they probably shouldn't. Is I would say that's more likely than not. What I also know is you're probably working with more experienced agents because the inexperienced agents are dying on the vine trying to find something to survive on. So they're not around as often as some of the other properties that you're seeing. So no, those are all great questions. And it is just, you just keep asking the question and find out, again, what's the benefit of them telling you that information about their client so that you can discuss it with your buyer and make them a great offer. So if there is anything you can share with me that would help me make a better offer for your client, I would sure love to put those terms into the offer if it works for my buyer. I mean, that's how I would say that. And then how do they just shrug that off? So great questions, great participation for sure. And yeah, I think that's definitely a conversation we want to have at one of our meetings, and when we all get together, Tuesday morning meeting that we're going to do every so often, and get that in there and open that up for discussion and see what other people are finding. That would be awesome. All right, great session, guys. We got 2 more sessions left, so we'll get through the week, and then it's off to family reunion.